I'm Amber Scott, 33, and I built my life on discipline, service, and showing up for the people I loved, especially my sister. For years, I protected her, supported her, covered for her mistakes. But when she grabbed the mic at her own wedding and mocked my military career in front of a full room, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been humiliated by someone you bent over backwards to support? Tell me in the comments. I know I'm not the only one. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw the line with someone who took you for granted, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about standing up and walking away. Because what happened next, no one saw coming. My name is Amber Scott, and if there's one thing I learned growing up, it's that being the older sister isn't just a title, it's an assignment. Unspoken, but binding. I was 3 years older than Paige, and from the time she could walk, she followed behind me like a shadow. I held her hand crossing the street, kept the mean girls from messing with her in 4th grade, and stayed up late whispering answers to her math problems when she didn't understand fractions. Back then, I thought that's what love looked like. You step in where someone else might fall. Our dad walked out when I was 12. Paige was 9. No big goodbye, no dramatic fight. Just a note on the kitchen counter and a rent check that wouldn't clear. That night, Mom sat at the table with a glass of wine and stared into space while the lasagna burned in the oven. Paige cried for an hour. I cleaned up the kitchen, took her to bed, and told her it would be okay. I didn't know if that was true, but someone had to say it. After that, I learned quickly which bills were due when, how to stretch a box of pasta across 3 meals, and how to hold it together even when nothing else was. We didn't have extra. We had just enough, if I worked. So I did. I picked up a job at the gas station down the road the summer before sophomore year and never stopped. Weekends, after school, holidays, I clocked in and handed over half my pay to Mom. The rest I saved for Paige. When she wanted to go to cheer camp sophomore year, I gave her the full amount without blinking. When her car broke down senior year, I skipped a training weekend to help her replace the battery. When she forgot her prom dress at home, I drove it an hour to her in the middle of a night shift. Every time, she said, "You're the best," or "I owe you," and that was it. And I never called her on it, never asked for anything back, because I wasn't doing it to keep score. I was doing it because I thought that's what big sisters do. You go first. You clear the path. You take the hit. Paige was always the one people noticed. She had this effortless charm, quick with a joke, warm smile, perfect timing. People leaned toward her at parties. Teachers gave her extra chances. Strangers smiled at her in grocery stores. Meanwhile, I was the one who remembered the bank PIN and fixed the Wi-Fi when it broke. I didn't resent that. I assumed that was just our rhythm. She sparkled, I studied. She performed, I prepared. When I graduated high school, college was a fantasy I couldn't afford. So I enlisted. The Air National Guard gave me what nothing else could: structure, discipline, purpose, and a paycheck. I didn't tell Paige right away. I knew how it would sound to her. When I finally did, she laughed and said, seriously, "You joined the military? Since when are you into all that rule-following stuff?" Then she added to her friend over the phone, "My sister's trying to prove she's a badass now. Watch out." She wasn't being mean, not exactly. But the message was clear. She didn't get it, and she didn't care to. Still, I kept sending money home. When Mom's hours got cut, I filled the gap. When Paige needed help with tuition for her community college program, I covered the books and half the fees. She'd text me sometimes, "You're a lifesaver," or "Thanks, sis," with a thumbs-up emoji. But I noticed she never asked how things were going on my end. Not once. When I was deployed to Germany, I sent her postcards and care packages with candy and inside jokes. She didn't reply to most of them. When I came home on leave, she asked if I still had to salute people in the grocery store, or if I was done playing soldier. At the time, I laughed it off. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Paige was just being Paige, lighthearted, a little clueless. That's who she was. I was the serious one. The one who didn't cry during boot camp, who volunteered for the dirty work, who took pride in showing up early and leaving late. I didn't need her to understand what I did. I just needed her to need me, I guess. When she applied to four-year universities, I took a week of leave to drive her to tours. We visited 3 campuses, 1 in-state and 2 out. I mapped the routes, booked the motels, and brought printed packets with each school's financial aid options. She barely glanced at them. Spent more time picking out Instagram filters than paying attention to the admissions reps. I remember one night in particular, after a long drive, we sat at a diner, eating fries and reviewing brochures. I tried to bring up scholarships, suggested she look into student veteran programs. She rolled her eyes and said, "I don't want to be stuck in some military pipeline, Amber." "That's your thing, not mine." I didn't argue. I just nodded and paid for dinner. That's what our relationship became. I kept showing up, quietly, consistently, without conditions. She kept assuming I always would. Birthdays, breakups, apartment moves, final exams, I was there. Sending care packages, driving across state lines, wiring money last minute. She vented to me about guys, professors, coworkers. I don't think she ever asked once how I was doing. When I came back from a deployment in the Middle East, exhausted and 10 pounds lighter, she greeted me at the airport with a quick hug and immediately launched into a story about her roommate stealing groceries. I listened. Because that was the rhythm. She talked, I carried. She vented, I absorbed. Even during my officer training, when my sleep was down to 4 hours a night and my inbox was full of high-pressure tasks, I still made time to edit her grad school applications. She called me at 11 p.m. the night before one was due and said, "Can you just read it real quick? I need a smarter-sounding conclusion." I was running drills in 6 hours, but I said sure. I always said sure. She never came to any of my commissioning ceremonies. Said the travel was too expensive. Said the uniforms freaked her out a little. Said it was probably boring anyway. I had friends there, sure. Commanders. Fellow officers. But not her. And still, when her boyfriend dumped her right before a wedding she was supposed to attend, I bought a flight, showed up at her door with wine and a dress that still had the tags on. She cried into my shoulder for 2 hours and said she didn't know what she'd do without me. That was the last time I remember her saying thank you out loud. There's a specific kind of silence that builds over years. It's not cold or loud, it's just the absence of certain words. Like, "How was your mission?" Or, "What's it like being deployed over the holidays?" Or even just, "You okay?" Paige never said those things. Never asked. Never seemed curious. If I was injured or if I was afraid or if I was proud, she didn't seem to notice the difference. To her, I was background support. Always ready, always reachable, always reliable. And for a long time, that was enough for me. I kept showing up. I thought that's what love was. What family meant. You show up no matter what. I didn't realize I was being tolerated instead of seen. Not until it was my wedding day. And she took the mic. Things started to shift the year Paige got engaged. It was subtle at first, small comments, different energy, but looking back, it wasn't subtle at all. Her fiancé, Adam, came from the kind of family that gets written up in alumni newsletters. Hedge fund money, vacation homes, prep schools with Latin mottos and legacy admissions. His parents didn't just donate to their alma mater, they had buildings named after them. At the engagement dinner, they talked about it like it was a merger. Paige just smiled and nodded, like she'd grown up in that world too. And maybe in her head, she had. The first time I met Adam was at their engagement party in Manhattan. I took leave and flew up on my own dime. She gave me directions to the rooftop venue like I was her assistant. "It's valet only," she texted. "Don't wear your work boots." I wore a simple navy dress, heels I hadn't broken in yet, and the only jewelry I own that isn't made of rubber or paracord. When I walked in, she gave me a once-over and said, "Look at you. You clean up nice." Then immediately added, "Adam's never met someone in the military before. Be nice." He has, like, zero context. I told her I'd behave. She rolled her eyes. "No war stories, please." Throughout the night, I was introduced as my sister, the soldier. Always with that same voice, half smirk, half shrug. Like I was a novelty act she hired for the evening. One of Adam's friends, a guy in finance with perfectly styled hair and a first name for a last name, asked if I'd ever blown anything up. I smiled politely and changed the subject. Paige overheard and said, "Careful, she might put you in a headlock." Everyone laughed. I didn't. A few weeks later, we were back in Phoenix for our mom's birthday. Small family dinner, just the three of us and a few cousins. Midway through the meal, Paige reached over and tugged gently on my sleeve. "Do you ever miss having real clothes?" she asked, eyes wide like it was a sincere question. "I don't know how you wear the same thing every day." I'd lose my mind. I told her it wasn't every day, and besides, there was something kind of freeing about not having to plan outfits. She blinked at me and said, "I guess. But I'd rather die than follow orders all day." Then she laughed, like she hadn't just insulted my entire career. I tried to let it go. Told myself she didn't mean it like that. She never did. But something had shifted. Her tone. Her posture. Like she was trying to separate from me a little more each time we spoke. During one visit, I offered to help her plan part of the wedding. She was overwhelmed with vendor appointments and catering tastings. I thought maybe, finally, I could do something for her that wasn't just bailing her out. She handed me a spreadsheet and said, "You'll love this part. It's all logistics." "Your thing, right?" I asked if she wanted me to take point on the seating chart. She laughed and said, "Oh no, I'm not letting you assign tables. You'd probably organize it by chain of command." Every time I tried to engage, she redirected the conversation to dresses, or champagne, or some new workout plan her trainer had her on. If I mentioned anything about work, anything real, her expression would glaze over. I told her once about a colleague being medically evacuated from a joint exercise after a bad fall. She nodded absently, scrolled her phone, and said, "That sucks. Do you think I should get hair extensions for the rehearsal dinner?" I wanted to believe it was stress. Planning a wedding is a lot. People get short. Emotions run high. But the pattern held even when there wasn't a reason. She started referring to my job like it was a phase. "Amber's still doing that military thing," she'd say, even in front of people who knew better. Sometimes she'd just say the army, even though I corrected her multiple times. I stopped bothering after a while. At brunch with a group of her friends, women I barely knew, dressed in expensive gym clothes and carrying tiny designer bags, she launched into a story about my basic training days. One of the friends asked if it was scary. Paige interrupted before I could answer. "Amber doesn't scare easy," she said. "She's like a human Roomba. You point her at a task and she just goes." They laughed. I smiled, barely. She topped off my mimosa and changed the subject. When I mentioned I'd be wearing my formal dress uniform to the wedding, she blinked, then burst out laughing. "Wait, like, actually? You're going to wear your military outfit down the aisle?" I told her no, I'd wear it during the reception. Just for a few photos. She shook her head and said, "So you're cosplaying at my wedding." Got it. I stared at her. She didn't flinch. Just sipped her drink and looked away. For a while, I told myself she was just trying to be funny. That she didn't mean any harm. That she didn't know how to talk about what I did because we lived in different worlds. But then she stopped trying altogether. When people asked what I did, she started skipping over it entirely. "My sister's in public service," she'd say vaguely. Or, "Amber moves around a lot. She's based out east right now." One time, she introduced me to her future mother-in-law as Amber, my sister. She's sort of in logistics or something. Very organized. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I wasn't carrying a weapon. I was standing right in front of her, and still, somehow, she made me invisible. During one dress fitting, she asked if I could maybe grow my hair out a bit before the wedding. I asked why. She said, "I just think it'd be more feminine. You know, for the photos." I told her I've had a shortcut since I was 19. She said, "Yeah, but that was before you were going to be in all my pictures." There was no please. No softness. Just the assumption that I'd change. A week later, she sent a text, "Can you not wear your flight suit for the rehearsal dinner? Adam's dad is super traditional and might not get it." Just trying to keep things easy. I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I replied, "No problem. Wouldn't want to confuse anyone with my presence." She didn't respond. I started noticing who laughed when she made those little digs. Who stayed quiet. Our mom would give a small laugh, then glance at me quickly, like she was afraid I'd push back. I never did. I'd just take another sip of whatever I was drinking and wait for the moment to pass. That's what I'd always done. But the tone was different now. It wasn't just teasing. It was performative. It felt like making me the punchline gave her something, made her feel lighter, funnier, more important. The harder she worked to present herself as a certain kind of bride, the more she pushed me out of frame. And maybe that was the point. Maybe I didn't fit her version of the story anymore. I thought, at most, I'd be a footnote in her wedding. A detail in the background. I never expected what came next, or how fast it would fall apart. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in a guest room that smelled like hairspray and steam. The hotel had overbooked, so I'd been bumped to a room off the service hallway with a busted lock and no working outlet by the bed. I hadn't slept. I'd landed at midnight after a red-eye from a classified assignment I still wasn't supposed to talk about. I hadn't even unpacked my go bag. My dress blues were still folded in the garment bag, pressed between my boots and a packet of field notes I hadn't had time to file. I took a cold shower, braided my hair back, and ironed the creases into my uniform with the kind of precision muscle memory doesn't forget. I didn't expect a thank you from Paige, but I thought maybe, there'd be a moment. Some small recognition that I'd rearranged classified movement orders and flown halfway across the country on less than 2 hours of sleep just to stand behind her in a white dress and not make it about me. That I'd come, like always, without asking for anything in return. We met in the bridal suite at 9 a.m. sharp. She was already surrounded, makeup artist, hairstylist, friends in matching satin robes pretending not to check their phones. When I walked in, one of them said, "Wow, you weren't kidding. She really is military." Paige laughed like that was the joke of the day. She didn't hug me, just looked me over and said, "Good. You brought the uniform. That'll make for some interesting photos." I nodded, set my duffel bag down in the corner, tried not to look as tired as I felt. We went through the motions. Hair, touch-ups, mimosas. I pinned her veil when the stylist's hands were shaking. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she kept checking the mirror, twisting her engagement ring back and forth. I offered to clear the room for a minute. Just us. She said no. Said there was no time. So I adjusted her train, fixed the curl behind her ear, and stood quietly in the back while her friends fawned over her eyelashes. The ceremony was held outside under a rented arch draped in fake greenery. Rows of white chairs on the lawn of a country club I couldn't afford to step foot in if I wasn't related to the bride. I stood with the rest of the bridal party, flanked by sorority sisters and friends I'd met twice, all in matching pale blue dresses. Mine fit awkwardly over my frame, tailored for someone with fewer biceps and more time in front of a mirror. She looked beautiful. Of course she did. Paige always knew how to land the image. I kept it together. Through the vows. Through the kiss. Through the endless rounds of group photos in the heat, smiling next to groomsmen who smelled like cologne and pretense. When she turned to me for a solo shot, just the two of us, I fixed her veil again, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't look at me, just tilted her head toward the photographer and said, "Let's try one without her holding the train. I want it to look natural." At the reception, I slipped away to change into my dress blues. The ballroom was already packed. Waitstaff in black and white uniforms floated around with trays of champagne and canapes. A string quartet played in the corner. Candlelight flickered on crystal and linen. I nodded to a few familiar faces, skirted around the open bar, and took my seat at the assigned table. Table 9. Near the back, next to the restroom corridor. I wasn't offended. I hadn't expected to be front and center. The speeches started after the first course. Paige's college roommate went first, teary, sentimental. Her maid of honor followed. Funny, a little too long, lots of jokes about inside stories no one understood. Then Adam stood and said something brief, polite. Raised a toast. I thought it was over. But then Paige stood. She didn't wait for a mic. She just raised her glass and called out, "Before we wrap this up, I've got one more." The room quieted. She turned, her eyes scanning until they landed on me, and smiled. Let's give it up for my big sister, she said, her voice carrying easily. Who flew in on, like, zero sleep to be here. Still playing soldier while the rest of us grew up. Laughter. Scattered. Hesitant. My chest tightened. She kept going. She's always been the tough one, she said. Like, scary tough. I think she probably wrestled Taliban on her honeymoon. Honestly, we're just glad she found something halfway normal to wear tonight. I was half expecting camo and combat boots. More laughter this time. Louder. Some of Adam's friends clapped. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at her. She looked so comfortable, so sure. Like the whole thing was part of a set she'd been rehearsing. She's been in, 5 branches now, she added, glancing around. Kidding. I know it's the Army or the Air Force or something, one of the ones with planes. We try to keep track. Laughter again. My stomach twisted. I watched the people around her. Some laughed. Some smiled politely. Some looked down. No one stopped her. No one interrupted. I glanced at my mom. Her smile was tight. Frozen. She didn't meet my eyes. And then Paige said it. The useless soldier is here, everyone. Silence. A pause. Just long enough for me to feel every heartbeat echo in my ears. And then, a voice from the back. Sharp. Commanding. Attention. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Chairs scraped. Silverware clinked against glass. I turned and watched as 150 men and women in formal Navy dress stood in unison. Crisp uniforms. Polished shoes. Decorations glinting in the low light. No words. No movement. Just silent, disciplined reverence. The room stilled. Paige's mouth hung open. I stood slowly. Not because I planned to, but because I didn't know what else to do. I turned to face them and saw faces I hadn't expected. Brothers and sisters from joint task forces, friends from inter-service training, even 2 instructors I hadn't seen since the academy. Quiet. Unmoving. Watching me. From the center, one stepped forward. Lieutenant Commander Nolan. He spoke clearly. Calmly. Lieutenant Colonel Scott, he said, voice level, eyes locked on mine. On behalf of those who've served beside you, learned from you, followed you, you are seen. And you're honored. No one moved. No one breathed. Paige looked like someone had slapped the air out of her. I turned back to the room. Slowly. Took in the stunned faces. The silence. And then I nodded. Just once. The SEALs sat in perfect unison. The moment passed like a tide pulling back. Paige didn't finish her speech. She sat down without a word. Her face pale. Her hand still gripping the microphone like it might steady her. No one laughed again after that. I returned to my seat. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. And she wasn't untouchable. You could have heard a pin drop. After the last of the SEALs sat, silence settled over the room like fog. Heavy, unmoving. You could hear the buzz of the overhead lights, the soft clink of a fork sliding off a plate, someone clearing their throat in the far corner just to break the tension. Paige stood frozen, still holding the mic like it could somehow reverse what had just happened. Her face, pale, blank, was locked in a half-smile that never quite landed. When she finally moved, it wasn't graceful. The mic slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. A waiter scrambled to pick it up. Adam's eyes darted between me and her, his jaw tense, posture folded like he was trying to disappear behind the floral centerpiece. I didn't move. Didn't blink. I sat straight-backed, hands folded in my lap, staring straight ahead. I didn't need to look at Paige to know she wouldn't meet my eyes. One of the SEALs, my former CO, Commander Blake, stepped forward. Calm, steady. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. With respect to the bride, he said, voice level but unmissable, we're here to honor someone who's saved more lives than most people in this room will ever know. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. He just stood there for a few more seconds, like punctuation, and then nodded once and stepped back. That was it. No theatrics. No lecture. Just enough to reset the room. Just enough to return the weight of the moment to where it belonged. I hadn't asked them to come. They'd reached out on their own a week before, after someone shared the RSVP link with a +1 field. At first, I told them no, I didn't want to make a scene. It was her day. I just wanted to get through it. But they insisted. Said they wouldn't interfere. Said they just wanted to be there. Quietly. In uniform. In the back. I never imagined they'd stand. Never imagined they'd speak. And yet, when it happened, I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel exposed. I felt still. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone had drawn a hard, clear line around the things I'd been swallowing for years. No one said much after that. The DJ didn't cue up the next song. The toasts ended. The cake cutting happened quietly, as if someone was reading a checklist in another room. People resumed eating, but the chatter never quite came back. You could tell some guests were still trying to figure out what they'd just witnessed. I left before the dancing. Slipped out through the side hallway, passing a small group of older relatives whispering near the coat check. One of them nodded at me with something that looked like respect, or maybe just caution. I didn't stop to clarify. Back in my hotel room, I peeled off my uniform one layer at a time. Hung each piece up carefully. Unpinned my hair. Wiped off the day. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the empty glass on the nightstand like it might fill itself. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I just sat there, trying to understand the shape of what had shifted. It wasn't that the jokes hurt. I'd survived worse. It wasn't even the betrayal, exactly. It was the realization that I'd built an entire relationship on the belief that loyalty was enough. That if I kept showing up, if I kept giving without asking, eventually it would count for something. But loyalty without respect isn't love. It's servitude. And the truth was, I'd kept the bond alive long after it stopped being mutual. I replayed the last few years in my mind like a series of muted clips. The late-night calls, the rushed flights, the birthdays, the bills I paid, the way she always joked about my life like it was a quirky accessory. My sister's the military one, she'd say, like I was a collectible figurine she kept on a shelf. Something to point to, not engage with. There had been a time when I thought the distance between us was just temporary. That we were growing at different speeds, and eventually we'd meet in the middle. That maybe after she got through school, or found stability, or grew up a little, things would even out. But that night, I let that belief go. Because what I saw in her eyes, when she made those jokes, when she watched me stand there in full uniform while the room fell silent, wasn't ignorance. It was choice. And that was the part one couldn't unsee. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the air conditioner humming softly above me. I thought about calling someone, my CO, an old teammate, anyone, but I didn't. I needed to sit with the silence. Let it stretch out and show me what was still there. In the morning, I skipped the family brunch. I packed my things, sent a short text to my mom, heading out early. Safe flight back, and left before the housekeeping carts rolled out. No one called. No one asked why. I didn't expect them to. I stopped at a diner on the drive to the airport, the kind with vinyl booths and chipped mugs. I ordered black coffee and a plain omelet, opened my phone, and stared at the message Paige had sent that morning. No apology. Just, hope you got home okay. That thing last night was, kind of a lot. I didn't reply. Because what was there to say? She knew exactly what she said. And more importantly, she knew why. The silence between us wasn't new. It had just finally spoken loud enough for me to hear. That day, waiting for my flight, I opened my laptop and submitted a request to transfer a joint savings account we'd opened years ago when Paige was trying to get serious about budgeting. I'd been the one who funded most of it anyway. She hadn't touched it in over a year. I pulled my name, closed my side. No drama. Just clean math. I removed myself from the lease on a condo we'd co-signed for back when she thought she'd move closer to my base for grad school. She never moved. Never told me she'd changed her mind. I just kept paying my part until it became routine. That afternoon, I also canceled the automatic deposits I'd been sending to help with Mom's utilities. Not because I was angry, but because I realized I'd been funding a system that made it easier for everyone to ignore me. No confrontation. No speech. Just boundaries. Because sometimes the only way to fix a broken connection is to let it go completely. On the flight home, I sat by the window and watched the clouds shift below us. The flight attendant passed me water and a tiny bag of pretzels. I folded the napkin into thirds, tucked it into the seat back, and felt something loosen in my chest. I didn't owe her anything. Not after all this time. Not after that room. Not after that mic hit the floor and she let it all fall with it. Some debts don't need to be paid. They need to be cleared. And for the first time, I was ready to stop collecting. I didn't say goodbye. Not to Paige. Not to Adam. Not even to my mom. I packed in silence, checked out of the hotel before sunrise, and drove myself to the airport. When the desk agent asked if I had a good stay, I nodded, thanked her, and didn't offer more. I wasn't interested in explaining anything to anyone anymore. Not after what that night had made so clear. By the time my plane touched down back home, I'd already started making the changes. I logged into the bank account we'd opened together 2 years prior, technically ours, though I'd been the only one contributing to it for nearly 8 months. Paige had pitched it as a shared goal, sister travel fund, she'd called it. We'd each add a few $100s a month and take a trip somewhere international together when things finally slowed down. But things never slowed down. At least not for me. And the last transaction she'd made was a $6.75 withdrawal from a boutique coffee shop in Sedona, overdrawn, of course. I transferred the remaining balance to my own account. Closed the joint. The app prompted me to confirm with a simple, "Are you sure you want to remove this person?" I clicked yes. Next was the condo. When she was thinking about moving closer to my base for grad school, she'd asked for help getting approved on a lease. Her credit wasn't ideal, and she needed a second signer. I agreed without hesitation. At the time, I thought it was an investment in her future. Thought maybe living closer would bring us back into some kind of alignment. She signed the lease. Never moved in. Left the unit vacant for almost 5 months, while still using the address on her documents. I had been paying half the rent to keep the property manager off her back. That stopped. I emailed the leasing office, removed my name from the agreement, and forfeited the deposit. Clean break. She called the next day. I didn't pick up. The first voicemail was casual, rehearsed. "Hey, so, I noticed some of the accounts are gone. Not sure what's going on, but if this is about the wedding stuff, can we just talk?" I didn't mean anything. I was just being funny. Call me back. I didn't. Later that night, another call. This time more clipped. "Okay, so now you're ghosting me? Over what? A speech?" "Amber," people laughed. "It wasn't that deep. You're being kind of intense." I feel like this is a little dramatic. I let that one sit in my inbox unopened. The third message came 2 days later. No intro. No greeting. "You're seriously cutting me off over a joke? Wow. Real mature." And that was the last time she called. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cold. I just felt done. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't payback. It was a boundary. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unknow what I tolerated. How many times I'd let her take cheap shots wrapped in charm and convince myself I was being too sensitive. A few days later, my mother called. "Amber, honey, can we talk?" Her voice was slow, delicate. Like she was testing the waters. She's a little upset. I'm not saying she handled things perfectly, but you know how she is. Sometimes she tries too hard to be funny and it just misses. She didn't mean anything by it. I didn't say anything. She took the pause as permission to keep going. "I'm just asking you not to let this ruin the family dynamic. You girls have always had your ups and downs. But you're sisters. You only get one." I let out a slow breath. The dynamic was already ruined, I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. There was silence on the other end. Then a sigh. "She feels like you embarrassed her." I didn't respond. Because if Paige was embarrassed, it wasn't because I'd done anything to her. It was because, for once, someone interrupted the performance. Someone reminded the room that behind all the snark and social cues, there was a person who'd served, sacrificed, and kept showing up. And that person had limits. A week went by. No new voicemails. No texts. It was quiet. And in that quiet, things started to feel different. I took a long walk on a Sunday morning. No headphones, no distractions. Just the sound of gravel under my boots and the sun working its way through the trees. I thought about all the times I'd rearranged my life to make hers easier. All the small ways I'd shrunk myself to avoid making her feel small. All the times I'd let her rewrite the story because I didn't want to be the villain in her version. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. But I wasn't available either. I took my time returning to work. Filed my debrief. Caught up on reports. Quietly transferred a few projects I'd been mentoring to junior officers. Started thinking more seriously about my next move. I'd been putting off a leadership development fellowship, one that would take me overseas for 8 months, because I didn't want to be unavailable for family stuff. That application got submitted. I also called the insurance company and removed myself from the multi-vehicle plan I'd been on with Paige. When she'd gotten her last car, the rates were too high under her own policy, so I'd added her to mine. That ended too. No notice. Just done. I heard through mutual friends that she'd started telling people I'd gone full military and cut ties with everyone. That I'd flipped out over a harmless joke and made her wedding awkward on purpose. I didn't correct it, because the people who knew me didn't need it explained. And the people who believed her never really saw me in the first place. I kept moving. Quietly. Firmly. There were moments I questioned it. Not the choice, but the weight of it. The finality. How something so lifelong, sisterhood, could just pause, freeze, shift into something you no longer recognize. But I'd spent too long believing that longevity equals loyalty. That history justifies behavior. It doesn't. Some things last because we feed them, not because they're healthy. And I was done feeding a bond that left me depleted. I didn't slam any doors. I just stopped holding them open. And in the stillness that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. 6 months later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, is this Amber? I'm the leasing manager at Greenridge Lofts. Your sister listed you as an emergency contact." I stared at the message, already knowing what it was about. I'd taken myself off the lease, cleared all financial ties, and made sure nothing legally bound me to the condo. But some documents linger. Some habits die hard. She must have forgotten to update the forms. Or maybe she hadn't. I didn't respond. A few hours later, another message. This one from the number she'd used before changing phones post-wedding. "I know we're not really talking, but I just need a favor. Can you vouch for me so I don't lose the place? It's just temporary." That was the last time she asked for help. I never answered. I didn't gloat when I found out she lost the unit. Didn't even ask how. But someone from back home, an old classmate of ours, DM'd me out of nowhere to say, "I heard about your sister. Rough stuff. Just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to deal with all that at the wedding. I always thought you handled things with way more grace than anyone gave you credit for." I said thank you. Nothing more. The rest I pieced together gradually, through a mix of accidental updates and stories people assumed I already knew. Her husband's job fell apart in the wake of some hedge fund drama, SEC audit, bad press, legal fees. The firm let half its staff go. He was one of them. They had to sell the second car. Then the ring. Then move in with his parents while they figured things out. I stayed out of it. Didn't comment. Didn't watch from afar like a spectator at a downfall. I just stayed still. Every few weeks, I'd get a ping, a tag on an old Facebook photo, a mutual friend posting something cryptic about loyalty, sometimes a second-hand update from my mom that she swore she wasn't supposed to share. I listened. I didn't engage. My mother called one afternoon, early spring. "She's going through a lot," she said. "I think she regrets how things went down." I let the silence do the work for me. "She hasn't said that directly," my mom added quickly, like she heard the sentence coming before I spoke it. "But she's quieter. More humbled, I guess." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. There wasn't much to say. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was simply done acting like I owed her anything more than space. That clarity didn't come easy. It took time. It took resisting the urge to fix things, to smooth things over, to write the kind of message I would have sent a year ago, calm, careful, full of both empathy and boundaries. But that's the trap. When you spend a lifetime mediating someone else's chaos, you start to believe your silence is the only thing holding the peace. It's not. Sometimes the absence is what makes the room finally quiet. Around that time, I was selected for the overseas fellowship I'd applied to after the wedding. A leadership training assignment with rotating posts across 6 bases in 3 countries. I packed a single duffel, left my apartment in good hands, and boarded a flight with no return ticket on the calendar. The work was rigorous. Long days. Early starts. Strategy briefings that made your head spin. But I was alive in it. Present. Respected. There were no jokes about my uniform. No passive digs at my career. No one laughing at the version of me that had chosen discipline over drama. There was just the work. The clarity. The steady rebuild of a version of myself that didn't orbit anyone else's comfort. Every now and then, a fellow officer would ask about my family. I told them I had one. That was enough. One night, after a 14-hour field rotation, I sat on the edge of my bunk with an old photo in my hand. It was from years ago, Paige and me at a state fair. I was in uniform then, too. Just back from my first deployment. She had her arms wrapped around me, smiling for the camera. I remember how proud she acted that day, telling everyone who'd listened that her sister had just gotten back from overseas. But even in that moment, I remembered feeling something off. Like she was playing a role. Like the spotlight still had to shine on her, even when the story wasn't hers. I folded the photo, tucked it back into my journal. Some people change because they want to. Some change because they're forced to. And some don't change at all, they just get quieter when the audience leaves. About 8 months after the wedding, I received a card. No envelope. Just a folded piece of thick stationery with my name on the front in neat cursive. No return address. No signature. Inside, if I could take it back, I would. I thought I was being funny. I didn't realize I was being cruel. I'm sorry. No name. No date. But I knew who it was from. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Not because I hadn't wanted to hear those words, even in their late and incomplete form. But because I'd spent too long accepting apologies as currency. As if a simple sorry could reverse the weight of years. As if accountability was something you could outsource to paper and postage. I put the card in a drawer. Let it sit there like a record, acknowledgement, but not repair. Back at base, I moved forward. Led my teams. Took on bigger challenges. The kind of roles that used to feel out of reach, because I was too busy splitting myself between obligation and guilt. Now, there was room. And in that room, I grew. People noticed. Not because I shouted. Not because I posted about it or wore it like a badge. But because peace has a weight to it. A steadiness. When you've lived without it long enough, people feel the shift before you even speak. A few months before I was due to rotate back stateside, I got word through mutual circles that Paige and Adam had separated. No details. Just whispers. One of her old friends messaged me, saying, "She's really not the same. I think she finally sees it. All of it." I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. Because by then, I'd learned something simple and solid. Not everything broken is yours to fix. Some things fall apart so you can see how much you are holding together. And some silences aren't empty, they're earned. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. Just my name, written carefully in handwriting I hadn't seen since high school, slightly slanted, too heavy on the loops. Inside, a single page. Lined paper. Blue ink. No greeting. No jokes. No disclaimers. I didn't respect you because I didn't understand what you carried. And I'm ashamed of that. That was the first sentence. Nothing else before it. Just the truth, blunt and unwrapped. The rest was equally stripped down. No blame shifting. No softening. She wrote that she used to think her way of moving through the world, light, loud, admired, was the better way. That she confused confidence with visibility. That my discipline, my focus, my ability to keep going without applause, it made her uncomfortable. And rather than face that, she made me the punchline. She said she wasn't writing for forgiveness. That she didn't expect it, didn't feel entitled to it. But that she hoped, if there was any part of me still willing to hear her, that I might consider a conversation. In person. No expectations. Just real. I sat with the letter for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to do with it, but because I needed to be honest about why I'd even consider replying. I didn't miss her. I didn't long for the version of our relationship we used to have. The one where I played the steady older sister and she played the star. That dynamic had cost me more than I realized, and I wasn't eager to rebuild it. But I was curious. Curious if she really had changed. Curious if the girl who used to laugh at my career in front of strangers could actually learn to listen. And mostly, I was curious what kind of person I could be around her now that I was no longer holding up both sides of the bridge. I texted her a few days later. Simple. Got your letter. Let's meet. 1 hour. Neutral spot. My schedule, not yours. She agreed. We met at a small coffee shop in a quiet part of town. The kind of place with low music and no chance of running into anyone we knew. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a tea, sat by the window. She came in exactly on time. No makeup. Hair tied back. Jeans, flat shoes, plain sweater. Not performative, just simple. She saw me and offered a small wave before approaching the table. I stood up, not to hug her, but just to take control of the pace. She seemed to register that and didn't push. We sat. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she started. I didn't come here to rehash everything, she said. I just wanted to sit across from you without hiding behind a joke. I nodded. Let her keep going. She told me she'd started therapy 5 months earlier, after Adam moved out and the silence in her apartment started to feel too loud to ignore. She said she didn't start because of me. That came later. She started because she realized she had no idea why everything around her kept falling apart, and the one person who used to catch her wasn't there anymore. I thought I knew who I was, she said, but the truth is, I just knew how to be liked. Not how to be real. She paused then. Looked out the window. I used to think your life was so rigid. So cold. Orders, uniforms, protocols. I didn't get how you could want that. She looked back at me. But now I see it was never about control. It was about responsibility. You held more than I ever saw. I said nothing. She didn't fill the silence. Eventually, she added, I'm not asking to be sisters again. I mean, I hope we can get there, but I know that's not mine to demand. I want to know who you are. The real you. Not the version I made jokes about. Not the person I filtered through my own insecurity. It didn't feel like a performance. There was no crying. No begging. Just a quiet, open discomfort that she didn't try to rush through. When I finally spoke, I kept it measured. I'm willing to try. But slowly. I'm not here to relive the past or pretend like it didn't happen. You made choices. So did I. And rebuilding this doesn't mean rewinding it. She nodded. I understand. And I'm not going to be the one holding it up this time, I added. This works only if it's mutual. If I see the old patterns come back, even a little, I'll walk away. And there won't be another meeting like this. Another pause. I get that, she said. I wouldn't blame you. I believed her. Not completely, but enough to stay in the chair. We talked for maybe 40 more minutes. Nothing deep. Just surface things, work, small updates, life logistics. She didn't ask for anything. No favors. No financial help. She didn't even try to hint at reconnecting with our mom through me. It was the first time I'd seen her just exist in a room without performing in it. When we stood to leave, she didn't go for a hug. Just gave a small nod. Thank you, she said. I nodded back. We didn't schedule a follow-up. No next coffee. No promises. But about a week later, she sent a photo, a snapshot of the book she was reading for therapy. Just the cover, no caption. A small signal. Nothing more. I replied with a thumbs up. Over the next few months, we exchanged short texts here and there. She'd check in, sometimes send a quote or a question. Never intrusive. Always respectful. I didn't rush it. I made sure I wasn't slipping back into the old pattern, defaulting to caretaker, therapist, fixer. If she asked something too personal or leaned too heavily, I pulled back. Set the boundary. Let the silence speak when needed. And to her credit, she listened. When I returned stateside, We met again. Different cafe. Same rules. This time, she brought a notebook. Said she was journaling more. Processing. She didn't expect me to read any of it, but she wanted me to know she was putting in the work. I appreciated that. She still had her flaws. Still over-explained things sometimes, still defaulted to sarcasm when she felt anxious. But she caught herself. And when she didn't, she apologized quickly and clearly. We were nowhere near close. But we were no longer pretending. And that was a start. It's been 4 years. We're not close, Paige and I. But we're civil. She sends birthday cards now, usually with a handwritten note, always short, never overly sentimental. Just enough to show she remembered. Last year's simply said, "Hope you're safe. Proud of you." I didn't frame it. But I didn't throw it out either. Every once in a while, she'll ask about my deployments. Not in that performative way people sometimes do, fishing for a story they can repeat to sound worldly. She asks, and then she listens. Sometimes she doesn't even follow up, just nods, absorbs, accepts. We keep it light, guarded. I don't offer more than I'm willing to lose. And that works for me. Because I don't need the bond we had. I just needed to stop bleeding for it. She knows that now. Or at least, she seems to. We've had a few conversations since that second coffee shop meeting. Nothing big. A walk once, during a family get-together. 1 or 2 calls that lasted longer than 10 minutes. But I've made it clear, there's no more cleanup duty. If she stumbles, I'm not the first number she should call. That's not coldness. That's clarity. And clarity has become my currency. The SEALs, the ones who stood that day, they're still in my life. Not all 150 of course, but the core group. The ones I deployed with. The ones who've seen me stitched together and burnt out and still ready to lead the next op. We check in. Meet up when we can. It's not frequent, but it's consistent. There's no obligation, no showboating. Just quiet loyalty. No performance required. Sometimes we'll grab a beer when our paths cross, sit in silence for a bit before anyone says a word. There's an ease in that. A respect that doesn't need explaining. One of them, Commander Rios, sent me a photo a few months ago. It was from that night. Not of the moment, but just after. Someone had snapped it on their phone. You can't see much, just rows of uniforms in the background, chairs half-turned, my sister frozen at the mic. And me in the center. Standing still. Straight-backed. Silent. I kept the photo. Not for vanity. Not even for memory. But as a kind of reminder, that dignity doesn't require noise. That sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, just let the truth of who you are stand on its own. Looking back, that day wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating her or proving anything to a room full of people who'd only known me through her lens. It was about visibility. About finally stepping out of the role I'd been assigned, the dependable background character, and letting the reality of my life speak for itself. That attention wasn't just a military protocol. It was a line in the sand. A moment where everything shifted. Where the room recalibrated. Where people who'd laughed politely at her jokes now saw the imbalance, not because I demanded it, but because truth has a way of rising. Some people came up to me after the wedding. Quietly. 1 or 2 apologized. Others just offered a firm handshake. A few asked what it was like, serving alongside the men who stood behind me. I didn't give speeches. I didn't tell war stories. I just nodded, smiled when appropriate, and left when I was ready. Because that night wasn't for them either. It was for me. There's something liberating about no longer needing to be understood by everyone, especially by those who never tried. I used to chase that. Validation. Recognition. From family, from friends, from anyone who looked at my career and saw it as a curiosity instead of a calling. I don't chase anymore. These days, I sleep easier. Not because everything's resolved, but because I stopped trying to resolve what never asked to be fixed. I've got my work, my people, my peace. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough. Paige still makes jokes sometimes. But they're different now. Softer. More self-aware. And if she steps too far, I don't explain. I don't coach. I just leave. She knows that line exists now. And to her credit, she usually respects it. Our mother once asked if we'd ever get back to how we used to be. I told her I hope not. She looked surprised. But I meant it. Because what we used to be was unequal, unexamined, built on me bending and her basking. We're not that anymore. We may never be close again, but we're honest. And sometimes, that's the higher evolution. I've thought a lot about what legacy means. In the military, we talk about it in terms of impact, the things you leave behind, the standards you uphold, the people you shape. But outside of that world, legacy feels more personal, more private. For me, it's this. I didn't let her rewrite my story. I didn't stay small just to make her feel big. And I didn't let one moment define the whole narrative, but I also didn't ignore it. I honored the line. I enforced it. And when the time came, I offered one last open door, not because she earned it, but because I wanted to see what she'd do with it. She walked through carefully. Not entitled. Not desperate. Just present. And I walked beside her slowly. Measured. Not out of obligation, but because I had space now. Space that used to be filled with resentment, with second-guessing, with the weight of carrying a connection that didn't carry me back. Respect doesn't always arrive with a speech. Sometimes it shows up as a chair being pulled out quietly beside you. Sometimes it looks like a letter with no return address. Sometimes it stands up in the back of a room, silent at first, then clear, commanding, undeniable. And sometimes it's just you. Steady. Unapologetic. Finally seen. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would always be in your corner? Did they ever try to come back? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever had to choose peace over keeping the peace, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your boundaries aren't betrayal, they're proof you've grown.